The clock was ticking on a Hollywood legend's life. The Big C had already claimed his lung, ravaged his stomach, and now it was coming for the rest. At 72, the iconic Duke had withered to a mere 140 pounds. His once commanding presence now triggered gasps when he entered a room. People would freeze, their eyes filled with sorrow. They'd whisper around him, their voices dripping with sympathy, as if he'd already crossed over to the other side. And honestly, that treatment was destroying him just as much as the disease itself. This wasn't what Duke wanted. He despised the pity. He couldn't stand the morning looks. He hated being treated like a ghost haunting his own life. Then something changed. Dean Martin showed up at his door. Dean stepped into Duke's home, took one long look at his old friend, this man who'd shed 80 pounds, who could barely maintain his balance, and said without missing a beat, "Good Lord, Duke, you look absolutely terrible. What's the deal? Did you give up on steak or something?" Duke froze. For a heartbeat, silence hung in the air. Then he erupted into laughter. Genuine, deep, soul-cleansing laughter. The kind that comes from pure relief. Because Dean Martin had just handed him something nobody else had dared to give. Authenticity. No pity. No walking on eggshells. Just two old buddies roasting each other like always. In that single moment, Duke wasn't a terminal patient anymore. He was himself again. And Dean understood. That's precisely what his friend was starving for. Before we continue with this incredible story, make sure you're subscribed to Hollywood Untold Files. We bring you the real stories behind Hollywood's greatest moments that other channels won't tell you. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss these untold tales. To truly grasp why Dean's final visit meant everything, you need to understand the bond these two men shared. And you need to understand what it's really like to witness greatness fade away. Their paths first crossed in 1959 during the filming of Rio Bravo. Duke was already cemented as a cultural icon, the living embodiment of rugged American spirit, the cowboy who shaped an entire era of Western cinema. Dean was in transition, evolving from entertainer and comic performer to dramatic actor, determined to prove he was more than just his past partnerships or his Rat Pack reputation. Director Howard Hawks had given Dean the role of Dude, a deputy struggling with alcoholism and redemption. This was serious territory, miles away from the smooth, effortless persona Dean had built his career on. Duke had his doubts initially. He'd caught Dean's comedy work. He questioned whether Dean could carry the emotional depth the character demanded. From day one of production, those doubts evaporated. Dean was extraordinary. He channeled vulnerability, anguish, and raw truth into Dude in ways that stunned the entire crew. Duke observed Dean's craft and developed profound respect for his abilities. More crucially, they forged a real friendship. Not the manufactured Hollywood variety, where people smile for photographers then vanish from each other's lives, but an authentic connection. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Duke valued Dean's authenticity. Dean never performed for approval. He didn't engage in industry politics. He was simply himself, effortlessly cool, naturally funny, incredibly talented, and completely immune to Hollywood's superficiality. Dean valued Duke's directness. Duke meant what he said. He didn't play games. He respected people who earned it, and Dean had definitely earned it. They reunited for The Undefeated in 1970, deepening their bond further. They'd check in on each other periodically. At industry gatherings, they always carved out time for real conversation. It wasn't a daily friendship, but it was absolutely genuine. If you're enjoying these behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories, do me a favor and drop a like on this video. It really helps Hollywood Untold Files bring you more content like this. By 1979, both men carried heavy burdens. Dean was wrestling with personal demons, his marriage to Jean had crumbled, his drinking had escalated, and the pressure of maintaining relevance as he aged was taking its toll. But Duke's burden was infinitely heavier. Duke was facing the end. The first cancer diagnosis came in 1964. Surgeons removed his left lung and several ribs. He'd conquered it, or appeared to, for 15 solid years. Duke lived cancer-free, continuing to dominate the screen, remaining Hollywood royalty. But in 1978, it returned with a vengeance. This time, it attacked his stomach. Duke underwent surgery in January 1979 to have his stomach completely removed. The procedure was devastating. Duke lost catastrophic amounts of weight. His legendary 6 feet 4 inches frame, which typically carried 220 to 230 pounds, had collapsed to barely 140. Duke looked skeletal. His face was hollow. his clothes draped off him like they belonged to someone else. His famous stride had vanished, replaced by the cautious, measured movements of someone battling for every breath. But Duke wasn't surrendering. He was stubborn to his core. He was John Wayne, for crying out loud. And that name didn't belong to a quitter. So despite clearly being in his final chapter, Duke kept showing up publicly. He wanted to prove to the world, and to himself, that he was still present, still fighting, still Duke. On April 9, 1979, Duke appeared at the Academy Awards to present Best Picture. It should have been a triumphant moment, a titan of cinema commanding the stage one final time. Instead, it shattered hearts. When Duke walked onto that stage, the collective gasp was audible. People immediately began crying. Duke was so emaciated, so fragile, so undeniably dying that witnessing it was shocking. He moved with difficulty. His voice, once thunderous and commanding, came out weak and strained. But Duke stood tall and fulfilled his duty. He presented that award with every ounce of dignity he could summon. The audience rose to their feet, applauding, not for the presentation itself, but because they understood they were watching a legend's final public appearance. Backstage afterward, Duke was mobbed by well-wishers, celebrities, executives, crew members. Everyone needed to tell Duke how courageous he was, how they admired him, how he'd be eternally remembered. Duke smiled graciously, nodded, expressed gratitude. But internally, he was experiencing a different kind of death, the death that comes from being pitted, from being treated like he'd already departed. People approached with tears streaming. They'd embrace him delicately, as if he might shatter. They'd offer phrases like, "You're so inspiring," and "You're in our prayers." Duke genuinely appreciated their kindness. He truly did. But what he craved, what he desperately needed, was for someone to treat him like he wasn't dying. To interact with him like he was still Duke, still that tough, unbreakable force who wouldn't take garbage from anyone. Don't forget to comment below and let us know what other untold Hollywood stories you want to hear on Hollywood Untold Files. Your suggestions drive our content. Several weeks after the Oscars, Dean Martin dialed Duke's number. Dean had witnessed what everyone else saw at the ceremony, a man clearly in his final days. And Dean decided his friend needed a visit. But Dean didn't call to inquire about Duke's health or to offer sympathy or prayers. Dean called and said, "Duke, I'm swinging by tomorrow. Make sure you're available and not doing anything inconvenient like dying." Duke laughed, actually laughed out loud. His daughter, Isa, who'd initially picked up the phone, heard her father's laughter from another room and was stunned. Duke hadn't genuinely laughed in weeks. The following day, Dean arrived at Duke's Newport Beach residence. Duke's family was anxious. They'd witnessed how visitors drained Duke, how exhausting it was for him to maintain his tough exterior when he felt so weak. They worried Dean's visit might consume what precious little energy Duke had remaining. Dean rang the bell. Isa answered, her eyes sad and concerned. She started to explain, "Mr. Martin, thank you so much for coming. My father is he conscious?" Dean cut in, "Yes, but he's extremely weak, and..." "Then let's not waste time standing here. Where is he?" Dean moved past Isa into the house. He found Duke in the living room, wrapped in a robe that used to fit perfectly, but now hung like a tent. Duke glanced up as Dean entered. For a long moment, they simply observed each other. Dean saw what everyone else had seen, his friend reduced to a fraction of himself. Duke saw something different in Dean's expression, but it wasn't pity. It was recognition, like Dean was looking straight through the illness to see the man beneath. Then Dean delivered his opening line. "Good Lord, Duke, you look absolutely terrible. What happened? You swear off beef or something?" Duke's family tensed. "You couldn't say things like that. Duke was dying. You had to be gentle, supportive, delicate." But Duke just stared at Dean for several seconds. Ends. Then his face split into a massive grin, and he started laughing. Real, deep, authentic laughter. "Go to hell, Dean," Duke said, still laughing. "I could still kick your behind, even like this." "With what? Those matchstick legs? I've seen garden steaks with more substance." Duke laughed even harder. "Get over here, you jerk." Dean walked over and sat beside Duke. Not hovering like a medical attendant, not too close, just sitting naturally like they'd done countless times before, on film sets, at parties, in restaurants over their 20-year friendship. And for the next 2 hours, Dean Martin gave John Wayne the most precious gift anyone had offered him in months: normalcy. Dean didn't inquire about Duke's condition. He didn't mention cancer. He didn't discuss treatments or specialists or prognosis. He didn't say anything that acknowledged the reality of Duke's situation. Instead, Dean told stories. He complained about a dreadful singer he'd caught in Vegas who couldn't carry a tune to save his life. He dished about which Hollywood marriages were legitimately crumbling. He grumbled about the new generation of actors who had no screen presence whatsoever. Duke listened intently, occasionally jumping in with his own stories and perspectives. They debated which Western directors actually had talent. Dean claimed Howard Hawks was overrated. Duke called Dean an idiot. They both cracked up. Dean launched into an inappropriate joke about a rancher and a saloon girl that Duke had probably heard before, but still found hilarious. Duke attempted to tell one back, but started coughing midway through. Dean waited patiently, then deliberately finished the joke wrong. Duke corrected him, and they argued about the proper technique for telling an off-color joke. The conversation never turned somber. Dean's face never betrayed sadness or sympathy. He treated Duke exactly as he always had, with irreverent humor, casual warmth, and complete acceptance. Isa, Duke's daughter, watched from the hallway at one point. She later recalled, "I witnessed my father laugh more during those 2 hours with Dean than he had in the entire previous 2 months. Dean wasn't cautious with him. He wasn't handling him with kid gloves. He was just Dean, and that's precisely what my father needed." Before we get to what happened next, take a second to share this video with someone who loves classic Hollywood stories. Hollywood Untold Files depends on viewers like you to spread these incredible tales. After roughly 2 hours, Dean stood up. "All right, Duke. I've got to roll. I've got an appointment." "An appointment?" Duke asked, smiling. "What kind of appointment?" "The kind where I've got places to be. None of your concern." Duke chuckled. "Get lost, you bum." Dean headed toward the exit, then paused and turned back. For just one brief moment, his cool exterior cracked. His eyes locked with Duke's, and there was something powerful there. Recognition, love, grief. All the emotions Dean hadn't spoken aloud. "Duke," Dean said quietly. "Yeah." Dean wanted to say so much. He wanted to say, "I'm going to miss you terribly. I'm sorry this is your reality. Thank you for 2 decades of friendship. You're one of the finest men I've known." But Dean realized that verbalizing those thoughts would destroy the gift he'd just given Duke. It would transform the visit into a farewell. It would acknowledge what both men knew but neither wanted to admit. So instead, Dean said, "Try to eat something, would you? You're making the rest of us look overweight." Duke grinned. "Get out before I find something to throw at you." Dean left. He walked out of Duke's house, climbed into his car, and drove away. He never saw John Wayne alive again. Duke passed away on June 11th, 1979, just 2 months following Dean's visit. The cancer had finally claimed victory. Duke's final weeks were agonizing and difficult. He drifted in and out of awareness. His family remained by his side. Hollywood grieved collectively. At Duke's funeral, Dean Martin served as one of the pallbearers. He stood alongside Frank Sinatra, James Stewart, and other Hollywood icons, carrying the casket of one of cinema's greatest performers. After the service, someone questioned Dean about that final visit with Duke. "Did you realize it would be the last time you'd see him?" Dean paused before responding. "Yeah, I knew." "Did you say goodbye?" "No." "Why not?" Dean looked away, his gaze distant. "Because Duke didn't need goodbye. He needed to be treated like he was still Duke, like he was still here. Saying goodbye would have been acknowledging he was leaving, and he wasn't ready for that." "Do you regret not saying it?" Dean considered the question. "No." Duke understood how I felt. We didn't need the words. What he needed from me was to be his friend, not someone mourning him. So that's what I was. Years later, Isa wrote about Dean's visit in her memoir. She said, "Dean Martin's final visit to my father was one of the most loving gestures I've ever witnessed. Everyone else who came during those final months came to say farewell. They came to express what Dad meant to them. They came to cry and embrace him and find closure. And Dad valued all of it, but it was draining. It reinforced that he was dying, that he was leaving, that people were already mourning him while he still breathed. Dean didn't do that. Dean came and gave Dad 2 hours where he wasn't a terminal patient. He was just Duke, hanging with his buddy Dean. They joked, they laughed, they talked about meaningless nonsense. And in doing that, Dean gave my father something more valuable than any goodbye. He gave him his dignity. He gave him normalcy. He gave him 2 hours of feeling alive instead of feeling like a ghost. After Dean left, my father told me, "That's the first time in months someone's treated me like a human being instead of a patient." He had tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. Dean had given him a gift nobody else could. If this story touched you, make sure you're subscribed to Hollywood Untold Files. Hit that like button and let us know in the comments what this story meant to you. The story of Dean Martin's final visit to John Wayne transcends two Hollywood legends. It's about what genuine love looks like when someone is dying. Most people, when visiting someone terminally ill, come for themselves. They come to achieve closure. They come to express feelings so they won't carry regrets. They come to make peace so they can process and move forward. Dean didn't come for himself. He came for Duke. He came to provide what Duke needed, not what Dean needed. And what Duke needed wasn't tears or farewells or sympathy. Duke needed to feel like Duke one final time. That's authentic friendship. That's real love. Not centering your own emotions, but focusing on what the other person requires. Not saying what you want to say, but doing what needs to be done. Dean Martin could have walked into Duke's house and broken down. He could have expressed how much their friendship shaped him. He could have delivered a proper goodbye, and Duke would have understood. Duke would have appreciated it. But Dean knew Duke had already received all of that from everyone else. What Duke hadn't received, what Duke desperately craved, was someone treating him like he wasn't dying. So Dean gave him that gift, and it was the most compassionate act of friendship anyone showed John Wayne in his final days. When Dean Martin passed away in 1995, his daughter Deanna discussed her father's philosophy on death and friendship. She said, "My father believed that when someone is dying, the most compassionate thing you can do is not make them feel like they're dying. Don't make their illness the focal point of every interaction. Don't treat them like they're breakable. Don't speak in hushed, sorrowful tones. Treat them like they're still the person they've always been, because that's who they want to be, even if their body is betraying them." That's what Dad did for Duke. He didn't pretend Duke wasn't sick. He acknowledged it with humor, joking about how thin Duke was, how rough he looked, but he didn't fixate on it. He didn't make it the centerpiece. He moved past it and just spent time with his friend. And that's the greatest gift you can give someone who's dying. The gift of still being seen as alive. The lesson from Dean Martin's visit to John Wayne isn't about death. It's about dignity. It's about seeing beyond the disease to the person underneath. It's about providing people what they need, not what you assume they should need. John Wayne was dying. Everyone knew it. But for 2 hours on that afternoon in 1979, Dean Martin ensured that Duke wasn't a dying man. He was just Duke. Still tough, still stubborn, still laughing. And when Duke died 2 months later, one of his final cherished memories was sitting in his living room with Dean Martin, exchanging insults and inappropriate jokes like they'd done on the Rio Bravo set 20 years earlier. That's friendship. That's love.